Welcome to Conspiracy Deconstructed.
Great to be here.
Tonight, we're diving into a real classic. A mystery that, honestly, it defines isolation, it defines terror. We're going deep into the cold, unpredictable seas off the coast of Scotland.
Oh, yes. This is a case that's captured imaginations for over a century. It's inspired poets, filmmakers, novelists, and, of course, generated endless speculation online. It's really the ultimate maritime ghost story.
It really is.
It just blurs those lines, between what we actually know and, well, what we want to believe happened out there.
We are talking about the disappearance of 3 lighthouse keepers, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. They vanished from the brand new Eilean Mor lighthouse in the Flannan Isles, December 1900.
3 experienced men just gone without a single trace.
Leaving behind this pristine, newly built lighthouse, an untouched meal on the table. It's baffling.
And because there was such an absence of evidence, right? A terrifying lack of clues. Well, the conspiracy theories took root almost immediately.
And some wild ones, too.
Oh, absolutely. The core ideas were that maybe the keepers were dragged off by vengeful Celtic spirits haunting the island, or maybe abducted by aliens up there in those turbulent Scottish skies.
Or, and this taps into that cosmic horror vibe.
Exactly. Taken by some massive sea entity, like a Dagon or Cthulhu figure rising from the depths.
Even a ghostly Viking longboat was suggested at one point.
Anything but a simple accident, it seemed.
So, our mission today in this exploration is to take all of that source material, everything from the official Northern Lighthouse Board inquiries, the telegrams, right through to the sensational magazine articles and poems, and really try to separate the powerful romantic fiction from the brutal, verifiable facts.
Yeah, and our goal is to provide you, the listener, with the most scientifically robust explanation we can assemble for what truly happened at that deep sea light. And importantly, we can leverage modern knowledge now, especially around things like fluid dynamics, oceanography, stuff that just wasn't available to the investigators back in 1900.
Right, they were working with a different understanding of the world.
Completely.
Okay, let's start by setting the scene properly. Because you really can't grasp the horror of this vanishing without understanding just how forbidding Eilean Mor is.
Absolutely essential. Eilean Mor, that's Gaelic for Big Island. It's part of the Flannan Isles, this tiny, really remote cluster of rocks about 20 miles west of the Isle of Lewis out in the Outer Hebrides.
So we're not talking about some cozy lighthouse you can see from the shore.
No, not at all. This is a genuine ocean fortress, an outpost.
It rises, nearly 300 feet straight out of the Atlantic?
Pretty much. Sheer vertical cliffs just plunging straight down into that churning water. Getting a boat alongside is a constant battle. It's only possible at 2 specific landing platforms.
There's the East Landing, which is a bit more sheltered.
Relatively speaking, yeah. And then there's the West Landing,
which faces the full fury of the North Atlantic.
Completely exposed, unmitigated violence from the open sea. That's the spot.
And the island itself had this reputation, didn't it? Even before the lighthouse went up in 1899.
Oh, definitely. It was considered haunted ground long before then. It's named after St. Flannan, a 7th century Irish priest who supposedly lived there. But the local fishermen, they treated it with serious suspicion, often refused to even land there unless absolutely necessary.
What was the folklore? Wee folk?
Yeah, tales of wee folk, spirits, maybe even sea monsters lurking around. So this ancient, eerie atmosphere. It was just fertile ground for supernatural ideas the moment those keepers disappeared.
Okay, let's walk through the timeline of the discovery. It's chilling.
It really is. The trouble seems to have started around December 15th, 1900. A passing American steamer, the Archelaar, noticed the Eilean Mor light was out, unlit, and they logged it.
Crucially, didn't their captain also note something earlier?
Yes, that's a key detail. The captain mentioned the light seemed to be faltering or operating irregularly as early as December 7th. Something wasn't quite right even before it went out completely.
But because it was so remote, and it was December, approaching the holidays.
Exactly. No immediate action was taken. Communications weren't instant back then. It wasn't until Boxing Day, December 26th, that the dedicated relief vessel, the Hesperus, finally arrived.
And this ship was captained by Jim Harvey. And it was carrying the replacement keeper, Joseph Moore.
Right. Moore was expecting to rotate in.
The moment they approached the island, things must have felt wrong.
Immediately. The keepers were always supposed to be waiting at the East Landing, the sheltered side, ready to help with the boat and supplies.
But there was no one. They fired flares, sounded the ship's horn. Nothing. Silence.
Just silence from the island. So Joseph Mor, who knew the procedures inside out, went ashore alone.
Can you imagine that climb?
He described this oppressive sense of dread as he climbed those 160 steep, winding steps cut into the cliff face, heading up towards the lighthouse tower.
And the scene he found inside. It's got those eerie parallels to the Mary Celeste, doesn't it? That famous ghost ship.
It really does. That same feeling of sudden, unexplained abandonment.
Walk us through what Mor found, because it's this mix of perfect order and abrupt departure that's so deeply unsettling.
Okay, so Mor gets to the top. He finds the entrance gate to the compound closed. The heavy main door to the lighthouse living quarters, also closed, but unlocked, not secured, which was odd in itself.
Strange for such an exposed place.
Very. Inside the living quarters, the beds were unmade. That suggested the men had gotten up that morning, started their day. But the clock on the wall had stopped. It hadn't been wound for several days.
Okay, so time stopped, metaphorically and literally.
In a way, yes. And the preparations for their duties were weirdly complete, but unused. Up in the lantern room, the big lamps were all cleaned, refilled with oil, wicks trimmed, ready for the night's lighting. But they were cold, stone cold. They hadn't been lit.
And then there's the detail that really screams crisis interrupted. The table.
Yes, the table. Set for a meal. There is meat, cheese, bread laid out, ready to be eaten, completely untouched.
And the chair.
And the small but critical detail. One wooden chair was found knocked over, violently toppled, as if someone had jumped up from the table in a sudden, sharp panic. An immediate alarm.
The only thing alive in that whole place
Was a canary, chirping away in its cage in the living quarters, the only sign of life.
Just an absolutely chilling domestic scene, frozen in time, suggesting this sudden, unplanned bolt.
Utterly unplanned. So, Mor reports back to Captain Harvey on the Hesperus. What about the more practical clues? Gear, clothing.
Right. What do they find in terms of work equipment?
Well, the official inventory check confirmed that 2 sets of oilskins, the keeper's essential heavy weather gear, waterproof jackets, and trousers, were missing, along with all 3 pairs of their sea boots.
Okay, so 2 men were dressed expecting to go out into bad weather.
Correct. Ready for the elements. But 1 set of oilskins was still there, hanging neatly on its peg in the entrance hall, and these belonged specifically to Donald MacArthur, the 3rd keeper.
MacArthur's gear was still there. That's significant.
Very. It immediately suggests he might have left in extreme haste, or perhaps wasn't outside with the others initially.
So you have this evidence. The unlocked door, the stopped clock, the untouched meal, the overturned chair, 2 sets of missing oilskins, 1 left behind. Captain Hardy puts this together pretty quickly, right? He forms an immediate theory.
He did, based on the location, the missing gear, the likely weather. He reached a logical, if grim, conclusion. He sent a telegram back to the Northern Lighthouse Board headquarters on the mainland, dated December 26th.
And what did it say?
It basically outlined the official theory that more or less holds to this day. He wrote, "A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan's. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane or something like that."
So, from the very beginning, the sea was the prime suspect. A natural, albeit terrible, accident.
That was the immediate official conclusion. The sea was the likely culprit.
But that rational explanation didn't quite satisfy everyone, did it? This is where the story starts to morph.
Not at all. The sheer strangeness of it, the lack of bodies, that pristine interior, it left room for doubt.
And this is where literature steps in and really shapes the narrative, right?
Hugely. The enduring mystery owes an enormous debt to the literary world, specifically to one poet, Wilfred Wilson Gibson.
His 1912 ballad, Flannan Isles.
That's the one. It's a powerful atmospheric poem, but it introduced elements that weren't strictly in the factual reports. Gibson wrote about the keepers staring silently out the sea, implying this deep psychological stress, maybe madness brewing from the isolation. He painted a picture of growing terror inside the lighthouse.
He took artistic license, basically.
Yes, he did. But his poem was so influential, so widely read, that it quickly became the primary lens through which the public viewed the vanishing. It cemented the idea of madness or some unseen, sinister presence being involved, not just a storm.
And that influence rippled outwards.
Massively. Gibson's themes, the isolation, the potential madness, the creeping dread, they were amplified again and again in popular culture. You see it in the Peter Maxwell Davies opera, The Lighthouse. You hear it in the Genesis song, The Mystery of Flannan Isles Lighthouse. Even the BBC's Doctor Who used it as inspiration for the story horror of Fang Rock.
So once a compelling narrative is set by a really powerful piece of art,
it becomes incredibly difficult for a simple factual explanation like they were washed away to compete. The myth becomes more compelling than the likely reality.
Okay, let's shift gears now. We need to step into the shoes of someone who believes something strange did happen. We need to present the key pieces of evidence that proponents of the paranormal or, say, human conflict theories rely on. We have to present their case fairly.
Agreed. And the absolute cornerstone of their argument, the thing that fuels thingies about madness or internal strife, is the Lighthouse logbook, or rather specific alleged entries from it.
These weren't in the official reports necessarily, but they gained traction later.
Exactly. These sensational entries were supposedly transcribed or recorded later, attributed mostly to Thomas Marshall, the second assistant keeper. They were really popularized, brought into the mainstream consciousness by writers like Vincent Gaddis in his 1965 book, Invisible Horizons, and they've been repeated countless times online since.
Okay, let's hear these entries as they've been commonly reported. They paint a really disturbing picture.
They do. So the alleged entry for December 12th goes something like this. Gale north by northwest, sea lashed to fury, never seen such a storm, waves very high, tearing at lighthouse, everything shipshape. Then it gets personal. James Ducat irritable, storm still raging, wind steady, storm-bound, cannot go out, ship passing sounding foghorn, could see lights of cabins, Ducat quiet, MacArthur crying.
Whoa, hang on, MacArthur crying. Donald MacArthur.
That's the line that jumps out, right?
Yeah, because wasn't he known as the tough guy? The experienced seaman, even a bit of a brawler?
Precisely. He had a reputation on the mainland as being hardened, physically strong, maybe even confrontational. Not the type you'd imagine breaking down and crying during a storm he should, theoretically, be used to handling.
So that detail immediately suggests something is deeply wrong. Either the storm is unnatural or something else is terrifying them.
Exactly. It hints at extreme, abnormal psychological stress. Then comes the supposed entry for December 13th. Storm continued through night. Wind shifted west by north. Ducat quiet. MacArthur praying. Noon, gray daylight. Me, Ducat, and MacArthur prayed.
Praying together. Again, suggesting extreme fear, perhaps desperation, inside the lighthouse, despite it being a solid structure 150 feet up.
Right. Why would these seasoned professionals, safe inside a brand new state-of-the-art lighthouse, be reduced to tears and prayers over a storm unless it was somehow unprecedented? Or unless the fear came from somewhere else.
And the final alleged entry, the one supposedly dated December 15th, the day the light was first reported out.
That one reads, storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. Chillingly final, and implies the ordeal, whatever it was, had passed just before they vanished.
This narrative, if true, is just perfect fuel for conspiracy theories, isn't it?
Absolutely brilliant fuel. It suggests these three men, Ducat the principal keeper, Marshall the second assistant, MacArthur the occasional, were experiencing profound psychological distress, fear, paranoia. Maybe not just from the weather, but from something within the tower. Or within their own minds.
Which leads directly into those psychological theories, the idea that they went stark mad, as some reports put it.
Yes. Driven mad by the intense isolation of Eilean Mor. Or, and this is a theory with some historical basis in lighthouse keeping,
mercury poisoning.
Mercury poisoning. It's important to understand the context here. Early lighthouses, especially those with massive rotating lenses, like the Fresnel lens Eilean Mor likely had, these huge lenses, weighing tons, needed to turn smoothly. The engineering solution was often to float the entire lens assembly in a large trough, a bath of liquid mercury.
Like giant ball bearings made of mercury. Clever, but dangerous.
Very clever for reducing friction, but it created a huge invisible hazard. Over months and years, that mercury would slowly evaporate, releasing toxic fumes into the enclosed space of the lantern room and potentially the living quarters.
And the symptoms of chronic mercury poisoning
are terrifyingly consistent with the alleged logbook entries, if they were real. We're talking severe mood swings, irritability, tremors, paranoia, sudden violent rages, hallucinations, profound anxiety, and depression.
So if Ducat was irritable and MacArthur was crying, mercury offers a potential chemical explanation for that kind of breakdown.
It provides a compelling, if tragic, physiological basis for why their behavior might have become erratic, possibly leading to internal conflict or irrational actions.
So under this theory, what happens? They fight. One snaps and kills the others.
That's one line of speculation fueled by the madness idea. Perhaps a fight broke out, one killed the other two, then disposed of the bodies and jumped into the sea himself. Or maybe they all suffered some kind of shared psychotic episode, triggered by the storm and the isolation or the mercury, and ran out into the elements in a state of delirium.
And proponents of this internal conflict or madness theory would point back to those hasty exit clues, wouldn't they?
Definitely. That untouched meal, the overturned chair, they suggest someone leaped up in sudden alarm or panic.
Likely MacArthur, right? Since his oilskins were left behind.
That's the interpretation. If he was inside and suddenly needed to flee, either from his colleagues or some perceived threat, he might bolt without grabbing his gear.
But the counter-argument is always, if there was a murder or a fight, where's the evidence? Where are the bodies? Why was the lighthouse interior reportedly so clean and orderly, apart from the chair and the unmade beds?
Exactly. The lack of any sign of struggle inside the tower pushes the explanation outwards, either towards the sea claiming them after they exited, or towards some external, non-human force intervening.
And that missing gear detail keeps fueling the paranoia. 2 men ready for weather, 1 seemingly not.
It implies MacArthur was caught completely off guard inside, or that he was fleeing something immediate and internal, rather than preparing to face the external storm with his colleagues.
Okay, and then we have to at least acknowledge the other bits and pieces that get woven into the more out-there theories.
Right, the purely speculative, often literary-derived details, like the 3 strange, large black birds that supposedly flew away as Joseph Moore landed on the island.
That's straight out of Gibson's tome, isn't it? Not from an official report.
Correct. It's a vivid, symbolic image from the poem that somehow got absorbed into the lore as potential fact over the years.
And then you get the full-blown supernatural stuff. Whispers of long-dead fishermen calling their names on the wind.
Or the idea that the disappearance was a cover for something else entirely. Cold War espionage theories have even been floated, incredibly anachronistically. Alien abduction is another common one in online forums.
And the sea monster angle.
Yeah.
Dagon. Cthulhu.
Yes, the cosmic horror explanation. That the keepers stumbled upon some ancient secret, some non-Euclidean horror within the island's caves or tunnels, maybe related to St. Flannan's time, and were removed.
The sheer dilemma of these mythological solutions, you can see why they appeal. They offer a kind of narrative closure that the simple, brutal possibility of washed away doesn't.
They provide an antagonist, a reason. An unsatisfying lack of bodies seems to demand a more elaborate explanation for some people.
Okay, let's bring the harsh light of verifiable evidence onto this atmospheric gloom. Time to systematically deconstruct the believer's case. And we absolutely have to start with the linchpin of the whole internal drama theory.
Yeah.
Those sensational logbook entries.
Right. This is probably the single most important piece of debunking in the entire Eilean Mor mystery. And it's a fascinating lesson in how historical myths get built, layer by layer. We need to dismantle this core idea that Thomas Marshall was writing about James Ducat being irritable and Donald MacArthur sobbing during a storm.
So, bottom line. Were those dramatic entries, the praying, the crying, the irritability, ever actually written in the official Eilean Mor Lighthouse logbook?
No. Absolutely not. They are fabrications, period.
How do we know that for sure?
We know thanks to the actual archives held by the Northern Lighthouse Board. The real log entries, which still exist, are completely professional and purely factual. They note weather conditions, wind speed, direction, sea state. They note routine duties performed, lamp trimmed, lens cleaned. That's it.
No personal commentary.
None whatsoever. Writing personal feelings, dramatic descriptions, or flowery language like sea lashed to fury would have been strictly against regulations. It simply wasn't done. If a keeper had written entries like that, it would have immediately flagged serious concerns with his superiors back on the mainland. It would have triggered an inquiry into his mental state or professionalism.
Okay, so if the official archives log doesn't contain them, where did these incredibly specific dramatic quotes come from? How do they enter the story?
This is the crucial chain of error. It starts, as we mentioned, with Wilfred Wilson Gibson's 1912 fictional poem, Flannan Isles. Gibson, needing drama for his poem, invented the emotional breakdown. He imagined MacArthur crying, the men praying. It was poetic license.
But people started treating the poem as a historical account.
Not immediately, but the seeds were sown. The real error amplification happened later. A key moment seems to be a 1929 magazine article written by a journalist named Ernest Flannan. Flannan, possibly misremembering or sensationalizing, quoted the dramatic lines directly from Gibson's poem, but he presented them to his readers as if they were genuine diary entries found by the headfirst crew.
Ah, so he blurred the line between the fictional poem and supposed fact.
Exactly. He laundered the fiction into apparent nonfiction. And then, decades later, authors like Vincent Gaddis in the 1960s, likely unaware of the original source being a poem or Fallon's mistake, picked up Fallon's article. or similar accounts. They treated those accounts as reliable secondary sources, repeating the fabricated entries and cementing the myth for generations.
Wow. So the entire basis for the madness theory, the internal conflict theory, even the specific symptoms potentially linking to mercury poisoning, it rests on lines from a poem, misrepresented as fact decades later.
Correct. Once you remove those fabricated log entries, the entire foundation for those psychological breakdown theories collapses. There's no primary evidence suggesting unusual fear, conflict, or madness among the keepers prior to their disappearance.
Okay, that's a huge piece of the puzzle removed. What about the environment? The other big mystery element is the claim that the weather was actually calm around December 15th, making a sea accident seem unlikely.
Right, the calm weather narrative. This is another claim that's easily refuted by the physical evidence found on the island itself.
Where did the calm weather idea come from then?
It seems to have originated from observers back on the mainland, on the Isle of Lewis, 20 miles away. It's true that visibility might have been poor at times due to mist or localized conditions, and perhaps the worst of the storm was highly localized around the Flannans themselves, not fully apparent from the distant mainland shore. But the official investigation report, compiled by Robert Muirhead, the NLB superintendent who visited the island shortly after the discovery, that report explicitly states the 10-day period surrounding the disappearance, roughly December 15th to 26th, was exceptionally stormy, not calm.
And we don't just have to rely on observer testimony or reports. We have the physical damage documented at the lighthouse itself. That tells the real story.
Precisely. Forget what people thought they saw from miles away. Look at the state of the West Landing, the exposed side. Muirhead's report meticulously detailed damage consistent with absolutely extreme, overwhelming wave force. We're talking solid iron railings bent and twisted like wire. Heavy ropes and crane equipment, the jibs on the landing platform, were ripped from their mountings and scattered. A substantial supply box, securely strapped down to the concrete platform, was completely smashed to pieces.
But the detail that always stands out, the one that seems almost unbelievable, is the height of the damage.
That's the clincher. That's the evidence that points towards something far beyond a normal storm surge. Investigators found clear physical evidence of wave action debris deposited, damage inflicted up to 34 meters, that's 112 feet, above sea level on the cliff face near the West Landing.
112 feet, that's already enormous. But there was more, wasn't there?
Yes. Even more astonishingly, they confirmed that large patches of turf, thick grass, and soil had been physically ripped away from the cliff edge. At an elevation of 60 meters, that is a colossal 200 feet above the normal sea level.
200 feet. Ordinary storm waves just don't do that, do they? They don't have the energy to scour turf off a clifftop that high up.
Absolutely not. Normal storm waves might break high up the cliff face, but they don't generate the kind of focused, upward hydraulic force needed to rip turf out by the roots at 200 feet. It requires something exceptional.
And there was also evidence of heavy objects being moved.
Yes, the report noted that a large rock weighing more than a ton, which was part of the landing infrastructure higher up, had been dislodged and moved by the force of the water.
So you put all that together, the exceptionally stormy period confirmed by the NLB, the bent ironwork, the smashed supply box, the debris at 112 feet, the displaced ton rock, and especially that turf ripped away at 200 feet.
It leads to only one scientifically plausible conclusion for the mechanism of that damage.
The rogue wave.
The rogue wave. Or possibly a sequence of them. And this is where we need to understand the historical context of science itself. Back in 1900, the concept of a rogue, or freak wave, a wave vastly larger than its neighbors, appearing seemingly from nowhere, was largely dismissed by formal science. It was considered sailors' folklore, exaggeration.
Why was that? Didn't sailors report them?
They did, for centuries. But the prevailing scientific models of ocean waves at the time, based largely on linear superposition and Gaussian statistics, suggested that truly enormous isolated waves were incredibly rare. The math indicated a wave capable of causing damage 200 feet up should only occur maybe once in many thousands of years, if ever. So scientists were deeply skeptical. They couldn't explain it with their models, so they tended to dismiss the accounts. Muirhead himself called it an unusual event.
But modern oceanography, especially with satellite and buoy data, has completely changed that picture.
Completely. We now know rogue waves are terrifyingly real and surprisingly common. They're not mythical beasts, they are documented natural phenomena. They happen multiple times every day across the world's oceans.
What's the technical definition? How big does a wave have to be to count as rogue?
Technically, a rogue wave is defined as a wave whose height from trough to crest is more than twice the significant wave height SWH of the surrounding sea state. The SWH is the average height of the highest one-third of the waves. So a rogue wave is one that is dramatically, unexpectedly larger than everything else around it. It doesn't fit the pattern.
And they can appear suddenly, even in seas that aren't necessarily at peak storm levels.
That's one of their most dangerous characteristics. They aren't always associated with the absolute peak of a storm. They can arise due to specific focusing effects.
And why are they so incredibly destructive?
Yeah.
More so than just a big normal wave.
It comes down to the physics, particularly nonlinear wave interactions. The most accepted theory involves something called constructive interference. Imagine multiple wave trains, different sizes and speeds, traveling across the ocean. Occasionally, purely by chance, several of these wave components can meet at a single point, perfectly in phase. When that happens, their energies combine, superimposing on each other. This can create a monstrously large, but often quite short-lived wall of water that seems to just erupt from the sea surface. It grows incredibly fast and can dissipate almost as quickly.
And the force they hit with is disproportionately large.
Immense. A typical large storm wave, say 12 meters or 40 feet high, might exert a breaking pressure of around 6 metric tons per square meter. A rogue wave, because of its often near vertical face and the incredible concentration of energy, can deliver impact pressures exceeding 100 metric tons per square meter. It's like being hit by a solid object.
We have actual measurements confirming this now, right?
We do. The famous Draupner wave, recorded by a laser sensor on a Norwegian oil platform in the North Sea on January 1st, 1995, that was the first definitive, undeniable scientific measurement. It measured 25.6 meters, about 84 feet, from trough to crest, in a sea state where the significant wave height was only around 12 meters. It proved rogue waves were real and matched the forces sailors described.
And there are other examples. Waves hitting lighthouses.
Plenty. Historical accounts mention waves breaking lighthouse windows high up, like at Eagle Island Lighthouse in Ireland in 1861, where glass was broken 85 feet up. The Fastnet Lighthouse, another famous ocean tower, has reportedly been struck by waves near its lantern gallery, which is about 157 feet above high water.
So the physical damage observed at Eilean Mor back in 1900 especially, that turf ripped away 200 feet high, is entirely consistent with the known impact forces of a modern, scientifically verified super rogue wave.
Entirely consistent. In fact, it's some of the best physical evidence for the existence and power of such waves from that era. The damage is the smoking gun pointing to an extreme hydrodynamic event.
Okay, so if we accept the rogue wave, or maybe a sequence of them, as the terrifying non-supernatural culprit, how do we reconstruct the keeper's final moments? How does it explain the clues?
The reconstruction becomes grimly logical, tragically simple. First, the initial onset of this massive, localized storm surge, likely involving at least one significant rogue wave, hits the exposed West Landing. This initial impact damages or scatters the crucial landing gear, the ropes, maybe the crane mechanism, the supply box stored there.
Which would demand immediate attention, right? Losing that gear could be catastrophic for future reliefs.
Absolutely critical. If they couldn't safely land supplies and rotate keepers, the lighthouse itself was in jeopardy. So securing that gear, even in dangerous conditions, would have felt urgent.
So James Ducat, the principal, and Thomas Marshall, the two whose oilskins were missing, they decide they have to go out and deal with it.
Correct. They gear up properly in their oilskins and boots, preparing to face the storm and head down the path towards the West Landing platform. In doing so, they almost certainly violated the strict Northern Lighthouse Board rule that mandated at least one keeper remain on duty, safe inside the tower, at all times.
But the urgency of the situation, seeing that damaged gear, likely overrode the rulebook in that moment.
That's the most probable explanation. A calculated risk, perhaps, driven by the perceived need to save essential equipment.
Okay, so Ducat and Marshall are outside, heading towards or working at the West Landing. What about MacArthur, the one whose oilskin coat was left behind?
MacArthur becomes the final, tragic piece. We can logically deduce he was likely inside the tower, perhaps in the kitchen area where the untouched meal was found. He either sees the next, possibly even larger, rogue wave bearing down on the island, realizes the immense danger his colleagues are in, or perhaps he hears a shout, an immediate cry for help from Ducat or Marshall as they are hit or see the wave coming.
And in that split second of seeing the danger or hearing the alarm,
he reacts instinctively. He runs out, jumps up from the table, knocking over that chair in his sheer panic and urgency. He bolts outside to warn them, or perhaps in a desperate, futile attempt to help them, without taking those crucial few seconds to grab his own heavy weather gear. He leaves in his shirt sleeves, essentially.
And then the main wave hits. That hypothetical 200-foot wall of water.
Exactly. One colossal wave, or perhaps a rapid sequence of 2 or 3, sometimes called a Three Sisters rogue wave event, smashes against the west landing platform in the cliff face with unimaginable force. That force, potentially over 100 tons per square meter, would have swept all 3 men away instantly, no chance of holding on, dragged into the violent sea.
And the wave's rapid retreat would explain the lack of bodies.
Precisely. Swept away into the deep, stormy Atlantic, no trace left behind on the rocks. And because the event was external, impacting the landing site, it explains why the interior of the lighthouse remained largely undisturbed, apart from that single overturned chair marking MacArthur's final panicked moment.
The cleanliness of the scene isn't evidence of the supernatural. It's evidence of the suddenness and the overwhelming power of the water acting outside the tower.
That's the most parsimonious and physically plausible explanation.
Okay, so we've laid out a scientifically robust, logical explanation. The keepers were almost certainly the victims of the ocean's raw, unpredictable power, a rogue wave. Yet, the story persists. It endures as this great unsolved enigma, a maritime ghost story. Why? Why does this simple, horrifying truth that nature itself was the villain, why does that fail to stick compared to the ghosts and sea monsters?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I think it really comes down to some deep-seated psychological needs and how we process unexplained events, especially tragedies. The sheer cleanness of the vanishing, as you said earlier, is part of it. It defies our expectations of what a catastrophic accident should look like.
We expect mess, struggle, debris.
Exactly. If they had been swept away by a more normal storm wave after a prolonged battering, you might expect to find doors stove in, windows broken, maybe signs of a struggle inside as water poured in.
But the instantaneous nature of a massive rogue wave hitting the external landing platform meant the interior was left pristine, untouched, except for that chair.
Right. And that pristine interior, the stopped clock, the uneaten meal, the untroubled canary, it creates this eerie absence of visible chaos. And that absence makes the supernatural explanation feel more emotionally resonant to some. If a ghost ship silently spirited them away or a sea monster plucked them cleanly off the rocks, well, that explains the lack of mess, right?
The monster provides a narrative logic for the cleanness.
It does. It offers a more structured, almost theatrical explanation than the messy, random violence of a rogue wave. It's paradoxically more comforting in a strange way to imagine a deliberate abduction than a meaningless, instantaneous obliteration by physics.
And we absolutely have to keep stressing the historical context of the original investigation. That played a role too, didn't it?
Hugely important. Remember, when Superintendent Muirhead wrote his report in 1901, he and the scientific community were working without the modern understanding of rogue waves. They were scientifically constrained. They couldn't definitively state a 200-foot rogue wave hit the island because their accepted oceanographic models said such a thing was practically impossible. Folklore.
So they were forced to use vague language.
They had to. Muirhead concluded they were swept away during a period of exceptional storminess, possibly while securing the crane, by an unusual event or an exceptionally large wave, but the explanation lacked the confident certainty that modern science can provide. This perceived inadequacy in the official scientific explanation at the time. It naturally fueled suspicion. People thought they must know more, or the truth is too awful to state, or maybe it really was something beyond earthly explanation. The vagueness left the door wide open for speculation.
So you're saying the human mind fundamentally prefers a definable monster, whether it's a ghost, an alien, or even a human murderer, over the idea of just random, devastating, statistical bad luck?
I think so, largely. We seem wired to seek agency, intention, and narrative with a clear antagonist. If you can identify the monster, theoretically you can understand it, maybe even fight it or protect yourself from it next time.
But a rogue wave.
A rogue wave appearing suddenly out of a chaotic sea state due to complex, nonlinear interactions. It represents true, uncontrollable, random chance. Its statistical volatility made manifest. It fundamentally challenges our desire for predictable patterns and our models of safety. And that kind of pure, indifferent chaos is, for many people, more deeply terrifying than any mythical beast. The mystery endures partly because the most likely truth confronts us with the sheer, random power of the natural world.
And so the Eilean Mor incident becomes this enduring cultural touchstone, A symbol of isolation, the awesome power of the ocean, and humanity's ultimate vulnerability when faced with nature's extremes.
Absolutely. The fact that even 100 years later, in 2000, the community back on the Isle of Lewis in Bressweet observed a minute of silence for Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur, that shows how deeply this tragedy resonated and how potent the symbolism remains.
So the official conclusion, stripped of the sensationalism, is perhaps the most chilling one.
It might be. 3 experienced men made a split-second decision, likely violating safety rules due to the urgency of protecting vital equipment during a severe, localized storm. And they were instantly, completely overwhelmed by a natural phenomenon that at the time wasn't even fully accepted as real by science. An encounter with a wall of water that simply existed outside the statistical boundaries of their known world.
The disappearance of James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur wasn't an act of vengeful spirits or cosmic horror. It was almost certainly a powerful, devastating, and entirely natural accident.
And if you look closely at the real evidence, not the fabricated log entries, but the physical damage, those twisted iron railings, that supply box smashed to smithereens, and especially that turf ripped clean off the cliff 200 feet above the waves, that physical evidence points to a natural force far more powerful and terrifying than any mythical sea monster. The ocean itself was the villain. #tag outro.
So we leave you with this final thought to ponder. When you encounter one of these enduring historical mysteries, something that seems to defy easy explanation and cries out for a supernatural or conspiratorial answer, do you find yourself searching for the hidden monster, the secret plot, the ghostly intervention?
Or do you consider whether nature itself, in its most extreme and unpredictable forms, like a rogue wave appearing from nowhere, might actually provide the most overwhelming, the most terrifying, and ultimately the most likely explanation of all?
What's your take on this? Was it purely the wave? Did the isolation play a key role in forcing them to take that fatal risk with the landing gear? Could something else have contributed?
We'd genuinely love to hear what you think. Was the scientific explanation too neat for you, or does the power of the rogue wave theory resonate as the most likely truth behind the Eilean Mor vanishing? Let us know.